Hello, and welcome to Born to Dance, the podcast for Matthew Bourne's new adventures that explores and questions why dance moves, inspires, and excites us. I'm your host, Paul Smethurst, resident artist for New Adventures, and every week I will be chatting to members of our extended family to discover their journey through dance and how it has impacted their lives. We hope you enjoy this week's episode. We couldn't launch a New Adventures podcast about the love of dance without starting at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start, as referenced in our first guest's favourite film, The Sound of Music. And of course, it all began with our Commander-in-Chief, the boss man himself, the incomparable Sir Matthew Bourne. Starting from a humble background of creating shows for friends and family in his living room, Bourne has become one of the world's most popular and celebrated living choreographers. For over 30 years, he has been creating and directing dance for musicals, theatre and film, as well as leading his own award-winning company, New Adventures. To list his multitude of accolades would take a while, but particular standouts include being knighted in the Queen's New Year's Honours for services to dance and making history by becoming the individual with the most Olivier Awards ever. He currently has 9 under his belt. So Matthew Bourne, welcome to Born to Dance.
Thank you, Paul. Lovely to be here. Thank you for that rather nice intro.
Well, it's very hard to sum up all of your achievements in a short introduction, but we will come on to some more as we delve a little bit deeper.
Right.
You won your 9th Olivier Award back in October 2020. How did it feel breaking those records?
God, was it that long ago now? October 20. Yes, it was. Yeah, it was a sort of a surprise one, that the 9th one. It felt rather odd because we were doing it like this. We were doing it online, and many of us were in a sort of waiting room waiting to see if we won or not. And there were people like Tom Stoppard there, really struggling with the controls of his computer and everything. It was rather odd. And Stephen Mear and I actually won for Mary Poppins, which was a surprise because we'd already won that same award when we first did the show in 2004. So we weren't expecting to win it twice. But of course, we're all sitting there with our nice shirts and jackets on, but with sort of joggy bottoms or pajamas on underneath. You know, it was like everyone's doing at the moment. It was fun, but yeah, it's crazy, and yeah, it's nice. I have to apologise to Judi Dench though, because we were equals before this award. So
I know.
Sorry.
She'll be livid. She'll never let you live it down. And so I talked a little bit about your humble beginnings in the introduction, and I wonder what you would tell your younger self if you could go back in time, thinking about you winning all of these Olivier Awards and all these amazing accolades. What would you say to your younger Matthew Bourne self?
Well, I don't know what I would exactly say, but I know that I would have been. It was a dream. It was certainly my life has been the dream that came true in some ways, because when I was a kid, I loved an awards ceremony on TV. I loved watching the Oscars or whatever it was at the time. And I suppose I never sort of thought, oh, I wish I was, one day I'll be doing that. I don't think I ever felt that, but I certainly loved it. And I loved those things. So when it started to happen to me, I was sort of felt, oh, this is, kind of what I dreamed of, I suppose. But I feel my life has been a little bit of wish fulfillment in some ways, because I had the same loves then that I have now. Really, it's really interesting that it's come around that way. If I look back at my earliest memories, they are very much about putting on a show and forming a company. Weirdly, it was always something I loved the idea of, a company, not just a show, but a company that puts the show on. Very much part of the way I felt at the time and thought. So yeah, it's been a real wish fulfillment life in many ways.
And I've had the pleasure of working with you for many years, and I always am struck at how humble and modest you are. And I wonder just, where does that come from? And is that important to you to keep your feet on the ground, as it were, as you've had so much fame and success?
I don't. It's hard to say, really. I don't know. I know I've never been ambitious. I've never felt that ambitious drive. What I've always felt is that I wanted to do what I wanted to do in terms of what I do now. So I was even at the earliest stage. I wanted to put on a show. I wanted to get other people involved. I loved music and dancing. It wasn't only dancing at that point. It was definitely song and dance and all that kind of thing that I loved. So it was in me, I feel, and anything that's come from that was already in there. It wasn't something I felt I had to conquer, and I did it for many years, as you know, in an amateur way, with little dance groups. I joined little amateur dance groups in Walthamstow, East London, and forming my own little companies. I had one when I was 14. I had another one when I was 18. And so I was always doing this and very, very happy doing it. Never thinking, oh, I need to do this professionally, or I need to do more, or I need to be big, do it bigger. Even when the company started, I felt that I loved the small company when we first started, and we did all our own ironing and touring around, in a very small way, and as a small group of performers. And I loved that. And I never, in a way, I never dreamt of it getting bigger than that. So at each stage of my life and career, in a way, has been a kind of nice surprise, really. It's not been I need to get to the top kind of feeling, So maybe that's got something to do with it. But also, very early on, I suppose, in my career, I met people like Cameron Mackintosh, who I kind of looked to. I found a quite an inspiring person, because I felt he had retained his love of what he does, even at the point of being the most successful producer in the world. It's like a kid, he loves it, absolutely loves it. And I can see him the same person as when he started out, sort of remortgaging his house to put on a show, as he is now, and I felt you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that love and that childlike joy in what you do. And if you lose that, then I don't know, other things become too important, I guess.
Beautiful. And that's exactly what this podcast is all about. We're talking to people about their passions for dance and the arts. And it sounds like that passion that you discovered early on is the thing that keeps you going even now.
It is, and many of the same things, Paul, that I loved when I was growing up as a very young child. You can see they're still all there in the work. My very earliest. I was thinking back about early memories, and what were the earliest things I saw, and certainly I would have seen Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly on the TV, and it's always my standard answer when people say to me, what's the first dance you were aware of? And it's an easy one to say, and of course it's very true, because I saw those films on the TV. But also, I think maybe even a little bit more importantly, early on, I got to see the first runs in cinemas of some of those films, like The Sound of Music you mentioned, but also Mary Poppins. I probably saw when it came out when I was 4 years old, 4 or 5. They were doing reruns in cinemas of great old films like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, West Side Story. I would have seen in one of its sort of recent, more early on reruns. It came out in 1961 when I was 1 year old, but I would have seen it probably when I was about 6 or 7, probably. That you can see these pieces in my work still. So the other dancers I would have loved are people like Russ Tamblyn, who I've since made friends with in Los Angeles. Has been a great thrill for me in Seven Brides and West Side Story. Dick Van Dyke, I probably was my hero when I was very young. I wanted to be like him. So the passion has been there very early on, and it has changed and grown. And obviously there were things I was not aware of then. Contemporary dance, ballet, those sort of things were not part of my world at that point. But dance and performance and theatre were there from the very beginning, and things that I was completely drawn to, from the earliest age.
I'm really interested in the fact that your first exposure was very much in a visual way, watching these things. I'm
Yeah.
intrigued about when you started to kind of physicalize these things a little bit
Mm.
more. Do you have a memory of actually of dancing and starting to take what you've been watching and then start to try it on yourself?
Well, sort of. Yes, it's so much easier today, isn't it? 'Cause you just get your YouTube on, and you can
Yeah.
be inspired, and you can also learn. You can learn the steps, and you can follow.
Mm.
And there's nothing like that when I was growing up. No video. That came a little bit later, so no recording of anything, and you only saw these things once. You saw something on the TV once, or you saw something at the cinema once, or you'd plead to go again and see it a second time. But that was it. And so all my dance all my dancing was from memory and trying to recreate what I'd seen from memory. And I kind of love that. And I don't know what it would have looked like because I didn't go to any dance classes or anything. I was completely self-taught, I would say. I say that now. I don't know what I would have thought about that early on, but I think I was sort of a self-taught dancer for many years because I just did stuff from memory or from what I'd seen. And it's interesting when I read biographies of some of my early heroes, like Fred Astaire and some Bilbo Jangles Robinson, all these sort of people, the dancers of that era. Um, they were all self-taught. Eleanor Powell, the tap dancer, never had a class in her life. She learned to tap through watching other people, and she had a
Wow.
weird style of her own. She used to turn with her hands sort of up like this, and something she'd sort of made up. And you think, well, that's all come from her, and that doesn't happen so much now because it's all about getting into a class and the formal training. But there's something to be said for that natural inspiration, I suppose, that was very pure in those days in a way.
And do you think that has helped form your approach to creating? If you didn't necessarily have such a formal technical background, I mean, you trained at Laban at the
Mm.
comparatively late age of 22. So,
Yeah.
do you think actually that kind of emulating your hero styles, but putting that into your own body, has influenced your
Yeah,
creative process?
very much. There's several things really. I suppose, Astaire and Kelly particularly make you feel dancing is a very natural thing to do. In the films, they just sort of just suddenly start dancing, and it creeps in almost. It's sort of something that becomes a very natural form of expression. I think that influenced me a lot later on. Um, I think, yeah, those. I think forming a style very much came from feeling very free about the sort of styles I was working in. So most of our shows, have lots of different styles within them. I don't feel I'm any one thing because I don't particularly feel trained in any one thing. Actually, at Laban we did ballet and contemporary, and we did lots of other things as well. And I'd always loved a lot of other kinds of dancing before that. So it's very sort of eclectic and wide. And I think possibly if I'd gone into a ballet training at the age of 6 or 7 or something, I probably would only be familiar with that. I would have lost all those other inspirations maybe along the way. So I think it's always felt it's a good thing to have had such an eclectic background in theatre and dance, to bring to the shows that we do now.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess what I'm intrigued by is your schooling in Walthamstow, and whether there was any dance. Did you have dance lessons at school? Was that something that existed?
Nothing at all.
No.
Nothing at all. In my primary school, though, I was seen to be someone who was to be encouraged theatrically, I suppose. I don't know how that came about, but I was allowed to put on shows in my first school, and I was allowed to pick people from any year to come and be in my shows, and that was obviously seen to be something to be encouraged, which was great, and I really appreciated that enormously. And I did versions of Disney films I'd seen once, like Lady and the Tramp and Mary Poppins, of course, and things like that. They were probably about 10 minutes long, to be honest. They were probably quite short. But they'd pile in all the other kids to watch them in assembly or something. So I had that opportunity, but there was no formal dance or movement or drama even, actually, or anything like that. I found those things outside of school. Certainly when I got to my next school, when I was 14 onwards, there was nothing at all, really, nothing. And everything, I had to find everything outside of school. And I really didn't like school very much. I hated school, in fact, mostly. I didn't think there was anything there for me at all. And particularly at the age of, I think it was 14 when I went to an all-boys school. I don't like to run it down now because the school's been amazing to me since, in recent times. The George Monarchs, they've been amazing, and it's an amazing place now that does everything that I would have loved to have done when I was there. But at the time, I didn't enjoy it very much, and so I sought my pleasures outside of school, which it was a good thing as well, because I didn't just sit back and do nothing. I found a way of making it work for myself and form my own companies and youth clubs and the local church I used to go to. I was in the choir at the local church, the local Methodist church. Amazing. And I went to Sunday school and things, but the choir used to do shows once or twice a year, as well as singing on a Sunday hymns. And that's the bit I loved, I think that's why I went, really.
What kind of shows did they do?
They were like song and dance reviews, and I got my first chance to choreograph what seemed like on a proper stage with an audience then. And I did numbers like things from Sweet Charity and a sort of Sweet from West Side Story or something like that. It's quite ambitious, really. Always up there at the front dancing. I was very much in it as well as choreographing it.
That's such a great image. Was this at the church? Are you doing West Side Story?
Yeah, the church hall.
Amazing.
It's still there. I'd love to go in one day and see if the stage is still there. I had so many lovely moments there in my childhood. Yeah.
And could you pinpoint a feeling that dancing gave you? I'm intrigued about the kind of effect that dancing has on us, emotionally and sort of psychologically, and whether you could sort of pinpoint that. What was that feeling that made you so resilient, I guess, and so creative to think outside the problem and start making your own stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I felt I didn't like using my voice. That was one thing that became clear after a while. When I reached adolescence, puberty, I didn't like voice. I didn't like speaking. So movement seemed to be something I could release into and express myself with in a way that felt comfortable to me. So that was one very important thing, I think, that made me veer towards that. I remember an early performance that I did when I was playing. You may have seen pictures of this, where I was the Sugar Plum Fairy in the local scout group gang show. And I looked like the only, there's pictures of it, I looked like the only one who's taking it seriously, loving being this ballerina sort of thing. But I do remember very strongly the smell of the makeup and that whole sort of roar of the grease paint, what is it called? The smell of the grease paint, the roar of the crowd, that thing. Really, I remember it now, the smell of the costume and the makeup and everything. I sort of love that atmosphere. The other thing I felt quite strongly, if you're talking about what it made you feel, it sounds odd to say, but I did feel it quite strong and did throughout my performing career, is this sense of kind of power that you have to connect with people, and that I love the feeling of knowing that I was bringing them in to look at what I was doing, and you kind of know sometimes when you've got that power, and sometimes you don't have it, and sometimes you do. But I love playing with that. It sounds like very sort of controlling, and I don't mean it in that way, but it's that connection with an audience, I think, that I really enjoyed as a performer, and dancing was, my medium at that point, I guess. Yeah.
And I think you can really see that in your work and the massive popular appeal that you've had. You really put the audience at the center of your work, and it really is about connecting with them. And you've sort of broken open the dance world in terms of bringing new audience in to dance that I actually have a quote that I read of yours that said that people strangely revere dance. They see it as sort of mysterious and maybe a little bit inaccessible. So is that a real central intention for you, to sort of to bring the audience in, like you were talking about all those years ago? You've carried that through.
Yeah, it's not completely calculated in that way. It's something that comes naturally to me, and the sort of thing I like to do, and I like the clarity when it's needed. Not always. Not everything has perfect clarity, because sometimes you want to have your own idea about it, and that's brilliant. That's what dance is so good at. But I like to know that that's the moment when I'm letting the audience have their feeling about something, and I also like to know when I'm telling them something they need to know. And so that kind of clarity and that kind of connection with an audience is something I've had a sort of lifelong fascination with, really. And I think it's the thing I miss most at the moment, is that connection with an audience. Even though I'm not performing, being in the audience as a company, having that connection with an audience is terribly important to us as a company, I think, and to me as a creator of work.
And why do you think that your work in particular reaches them, or speaks to them in comparison
Um,
to some other dance works, maybe?
God, there's so many things, Paul. There are many things. One is telling a story, which everyone loves, and if you can tell a story, then you've got people hooked to a certain extent. It's characters that people can identify with in a way, uh, and can clearly say who they are, and that has a lot to do with Les Brotherson's designs, where the costumes look more like film or play costumes from a play, or they don't look like always look like dance adapted costumes or people on point and things. I'm sort of
Mm,
generalizing, obviously. We have done those things.
sure.
Um, so that's two of the things. The thing I discovered early on is humor. Humor just wins over an audience, and I suppose I am a little bit more calculated now in the way I put humor in quite early on in a piece to get those doubters involved, so they sort of start to enjoy it. It wins people over, um, and I think I've learned how to do that better as time has gone by. How to connect with an audience in that way. But I think at the heart of it is probably storytelling, and that's what I love to do. But I also love it when the story goes off on a tangent into a sort of abstract world, like in Swan Lake, Act Two, the Swans. There's only one little story going on for about half an hour there, you know. But it's people are hooked by that point, and they don't mind that they're watching a lot of swans dancing, for a long time. Without a plot necessarily being there.
Mm,
So you can feed these things in, but people understand the world that they're in already, and that's very important. And also knowing that your audience as well. And we do tour around the country, around the world, and that's the audiences are not dance experts necessarily. They're people who've grown to love these productions and stories that we tell, and are really happy that it's something that they engage with, they can engage with. Um,
mm,
and that they get. And I think sometimes the audience feels quite proud of themselves. So I never thought I would
mm.
understand dance, but I do with this, and it sort of works for me.
It almost feels like you're talking about creating work that would speak to your younger self in a way. In terms of the fact that maybe you didn't have that dance knowledge and training, but you had that love of stories and films and being taken on a journey.
Completely. I mean, I've got to please myself, and I'm a bit sometimes I'll throw something in purely for myself. That's something I've wanted to do for a long time. Hopefully, other people will enjoy it. Like the sand dance in the Red Shoes, for example, completely has nothing to do with the Red Shoes at all, and it just passes, gets us from one scene to another, and there is a sore point to it, but um, I've been wanting to get that in for years, So you do sort of please yourself, and that's your gauge, really. And you hopefully know your audience, as I said, and what you think people are going to like, and what people are going to get. I suppose there is an understanding of that, but it's all about instinct, really, and how far you can go. And there's a lot of quite daring stuff that we did early on. It would be seen to be daring, So we weren't just doing easy work, but what we were doing sometimes was pushing the boundaries a bit, but then making people either engage with the characters ahead of that, or we were making them laugh with it as well. And as soon as people were about to become like, oh, I didn't expect to see this in dance, they were sort of that you'd make them laugh, and it would all go away. So it's not just about keeping people happy as such. It's about making people think as well, but doing that in a way that's not going to shut people off. That's very important as well.
Yeah, I just think you really encapsulate that so well. I read while I was researching for this podcast, I read another quote that was talking about your work and saying it's not highbrow or lowbrow, but it's all brow, and I really love that because it's just being open for everyone, and I think sometimes dance can feel very alienating. And you bring, so many new people to it, and that really thank you for that, because I was one of those people. And it's really, you have this really clear love of musical theatre and Hollywood film. I'm intrigued if you could tell us a little bit about how you sort of came to contemporary dance and started to make work maybe more in that style. You started training late, and I wonder why that was as well. There's two questions folded up in there.
It's a funny pathway, really. I mean, I've told it many times, so I won't go into it too much, the earlier part, but I did find myself, I was obviously into all these things, as you say, but really had no experience of contemporary dance or ballet. I mean, the Red Shoes was probably my own experience of seeing ballet in a film, which I'd enjoyed earlier on. But I got to a point in my life when I'd left school at 18, and I was working in at the BBC, actually, in the archives. So I thought it was a sort of show busy kind of job, which of course it wasn't. But at that time as well, I started trying to educate myself in different areas, like reading novels of famous writers I'd never read before, and that kind. I was very into that. I should do that. I should try that. I should try this. Then I tried ballet, which was Swan Lake. I thought, what's famous ballet? And so I went to see that, and very soon after that, I also went to. I got the bug for something that was danced all the way through. And this, I've said this before, but it sounds terribly naive. But I used to go to a lot of musicals, when I was younger. My parents used to take me, and I loved all that, But I went many times sometimes, but realizing that I was waiting for the numbers, to see the dances again. And when I went to ballet and contemporary dance the first time, I thought, well, they dance all the way through. It's great, I don't have to sort of sit through the boring scenes anymore that I knew very well. I suppose in a way, it's like a songwriter suddenly writing a symphony or something, that you feel you could go further, and you could it could take longer to tell that story. And up to that point, I'd probably only done like numbers that were 3-4 minutes long, and then you saw the possibility that dance could tell a bigger story over an evening even.
And you mentioned just then going to see your first ballet, and we're asking all of our interviewees to tell us about their most impactful piece of dance that they've seen. And you mentioned this, seeing Swan Lake. Why do you think that piece was so impactful for you at that time?
Well, it was. I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, I have to tell you, Paul. Before
always helps.
It did help quite a lot, because it felt like this incredible dream, that happened in front of me. I love the fact it was the music was overwhelmingly good for one thing, and it was played live, and I was at the top of Sadler's Wells, so it was all the music was coming up at me. I love the what I felt I was seeing was a recreation of a piece of history. Probably not completely true, but at the time I felt this is Swan Lake. It looks like it did 100 years ago. I wasn't aware of different productions and things, so I felt as I was seeing this piece of history that had been preserved, and I loved the star system in it in a weird way, because I'd always loved that with movies. I'd love stars and the way it presented people like stars, and it was very glamorous. And I say all these things because it's not what people normally say about ballet. They'll go, "Oh, it's so beautiful," and but it actually had it had a different effect on me. I remember thinking that the swans, I thought all the movement was going to be very slow, and when they came on in their zigzag entrance and things like the Signet dance were very fast. And I thought, oh, I wasn't expecting fast, to move that quickly. All things like that, they were just sort of revelations in one afternoon. It was a matinee, I think. And yeah, I was on my own. And then I went to see it again, but not that production. There happened to be another production on at the Royal Opera House. Royal Canadian Ballet were touring. And I went to see it again. I thought I was going to see exactly the same thing, because I'd seen Swan Lake. I was going to see Swan Lake again. It doesn't matter whether you see it at Sadler's Wells or the Royal Opera House. But of course, it was very different. The first production I saw was, I think, a Peter Darrell one, which was all Opium Dream and all this sort of ideas, and this one was a little bit more conventional, maybe. It was still sort of the same, but different. And I realized then you could tell many different stories through that music. And I suppose, not that I'd ever dreamt of tackling it at that time. It was embedded in me that not all Swan Lakes are the same, I guess.
Yeah. So that wasn't the moment where the idea popped into your head for obviously your famous version.
God, no. That would have been ludicrous.
Yeah.
I hadn't even, dance training was still years away, But what it did kick off for me while I was working, and this is another interesting thing that actually may not have happened had I been in training at this point. I just went to see so much because I was working, and I'd go after work to see things at Sadler's Wells, Twyla Tharp, Merce Cunningham, all the contemporary visiting companies, the London Contemporary Dance Theatre I loved, Rambert, and then lots of things at the Royal Opera House, lots of Ashton and Macmillan and all these choreographers that told stories through an evening. And seeing them many times, it went into my brain and stayed there, really. And I still call upon all those things now, and I may not have seen quite so much as I did if I'd been, in full training at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Being a student and having to pay those bills and
working so
hard.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And do you still like to go and watch other people's dance productions? Obviously not right now because we are recording in lockdown, but...
Interesting question. You find yourself... yes, I do, yes. Some things. But I do, these days, I'm a little bit like, why do you love dance? And I always say, well, I don't love all dance. I love the dance that I love. And it's the same with musical theatre. It's the same with music. It's the same with anyone, but somehow you're supposed to love dance. I love it when when I do just love it. It can still transport me, but it gets less and less as time goes by a little bit, and I kind of know the things I suppose that will do that for me and the choreographers that I love in particular. And I went to see at the Royal Opera House last year, or probably the year before now, Enigma Variations, Ashton, and I hadn't seen it for many years. It was one of those ones that I saw and they don't do very often. And I sat there and I was in tears all the way through it. Not because it was a moving piece necessarily, but just the whole thing about the music, the performances, the choreography just moved me so much. And I thought, this is what I love. I love to be reminded of that sometimes, of what I really love. But I do love watching the performers. I love watching people get inside a role, and develop. That's one of my big loves at the moment is the development of the young artists, that come to us, and I get enormous pleasure from that, and I can watch those things again and again, and really work with them on that, and I enjoy that, obviously.
It says a lot about your sort of character and your investment in, your dancers, which is such a big part of what you do, that kind of development of the next generation, as it were. And I think a lot of choreographers often can make a piece and then never revisit it.
Yeah,
And I think it shows a lot about how much you care about your work and the family that you create. That we use that term a lot, but it is a family, and
yeah.
it's obviously very important to you.
Well, if I didn't have that interest, Paul, in reinvention and wanting things to be, wanting to revive work, as you say, and wanting new casts to do it, the company wouldn't really exist the way it does today. And I love I've always loved it, and I don't do it as by any means as a chore. I love reviving work, and I love trying to make them better. And that is why this family has got bigger and bigger, because the history of the company started as a group of friends, and it had that family feeling, and we've kind of managed to maintain it beyond that. And one of the ways we have managed to do that, as much more time has gone by, is there's a whole generation of dancers now who don't dance full time anymore, but do still work with us and do lead workshops and do projects. And so the family is still there. It's just got
Mm.
bigger and more people involved. And well, I'd hate it if we ever lost that. I think that would be the time to stop. I think if it became too, like, there was a one point in our history, you would be maybe unaware of it, from in the middle of when we formed New Adventures, actually, around, when we changed the name from Adventures of Motion Pictures to New Adventures, there was a move within the board of our company at that time, not our current wonderful board that we have, but the we should reproduce Swan Lake around the world. You should have it on here and on there, and then we should reproduce this production to have a West End this,
Mm.
and it was so anti-company somehow. It doesn't matter if you're not there. You've got all these people who can stage it for you and stuff. And for me, I felt every performance needed to feel special. You needed to think you were seeing New Adventures, the company. Even though sometimes we have two shows, we make it feel like the company is just split into two, and we've got that happening. But you're still New Adventures. You're not. This is the main New Adventures. There's another lot doing this. You're a part of New Adventures, and that was a time when we could have probably become more commercial, made a lot more money, I guess. But I resisted that strongly, and we've still managed to maintain that company feel. And this is when you come to see us, you see New Adventures, the company.
Yeah. And you talked there about that investment about within those younger sort of dancers. Why do you think that's important to you? What do you think that kind of legacy, or that you're trying to sort of maybe teach them or bring out in them?
Well, I suppose we're the only company that truly does what we do. It's our own particular style of work. So it does need that nurturing and that training and that development within the company. You can't just keep staging things with a whole bunch of new people and expect it to be on the same level,
Mm.
So it is about a journeying through. And also, I feel in bringing in, as we have over the years, the standards of technique and performance and stuff have got stronger and stronger and stronger, I think. Partly due to people being drawn to the company, they see the kind of work it is and they want to be part of that. But that's also up to our game. So it's not all coming from my side. It's sometimes coming from the performers as well, who come in and you go like, wow, they're so good. We can make this better now. We can improve this. We can take things further. The acting performances, it's something we've learnt about on the job, really. And I think that's sometimes comes through the honesty of a particular performer, that you think, oh, we can go deeper here, maybe, and that's been a something to learn along the way as well. I think this thing that we used to struggle with how we could perform to large audiences. So how did you play it? How did you act it? Whether it was the people at the back or the people right at the front. And we made a revelatory discovery that if you're honest and truthful in your performance, then it works for everyone. It's not about big or small, it's about truth. And that's maybe we learned halfway through the company's history. So
Sure.
but we've learned on the job, I think, through doing it. And it's a two-way thing with the
I
artist.
love that. And yeah, I love that it's collaborative in that way, and it is about sharing and being inspired by each other. And that sort of peer learning is really important. And also within the company, you've got some more long-standing dancers, so some of the young ones learn from them, but vice versa. We really see that happening the other way around.
We do, I think. What we love, I think, as a company and as a group of people, is talent. And if someone comes in and it's their first job, but you can see, wow, they've got something, they're great. No one cares if they do a leading role because they know that they should be doing it. They deserve it. They're great. So, and we don't have a hierarchical system in New Adventures, as people may not realize. In some ballet companies, you have your principals and your soloists and your very various degrees within the company. We don't have that. We have principal roles that are for that night's performance. These people play the principal roles, so they are the principals. And I don't mind when people call themselves a New Adventures principal because it's true, but we don't have an official system. And they may do a supporting role one night as well, and that's fine as well. That's great. We've always celebrated that. I think there are no small parts, that kind of ethos. So I think that's helped the company as well become more of a unified group of artists, I think.
And definitely, and it's almost a little bit like continuing your training, I think, when you join New Adventures, which is really exciting to think that you can go into a company, and yes, you have to be at a certain level, but you're not expected to be perfect. You're expected to be open and to be like a sponge and really take on board and sort of learn as you go. Some people might not necessarily have that acting experience that you require, but like you were talking about, it's something that you can draw out in people.
Well, people don't realize that when people come into the company, they get to do a lot of performances very quickly. They're in at the deep end. They may do more performances in 2 months than some other dancers do in 2 years. It really is incredible that they learn on the job. And we've seen it many times, haven't we, Paul, that you bring in raw talent, and by the end of a tour, they're doing things you'd never have dreamt they were doing, and really taking on roles and acting and believing in what they're doing, and their technique gets better because they're working every day, and they're finding a way of doing that. It doesn't suit everyone, as we know as well. We say this, especially with Swan Lake, when we do get a big intake of young dancers into that company. We keep saying it's hard work. It's not easy. It really is a tough show. We do a lot of shows. It may not be for you. We do a long tour, and it doesn't work for everyone. But most people, in our experience, I guess, thrive on it. And it's what they really want, and they love it. They love the hard work. And we've seen many people go from being complete beginners, really, to being really skilled performers by the end of a tour. It's amazing.
Matthew, I'm going to move on. It couldn't be a podcast called Born to Dance without us touching on music. And we've already spoken about how integral that is to your inspiration and your creative process. But I'm interested in what would be your favorite piece of music to dance to. We asked you this beforehand, and we're going to play a little snippet of your choice. So this is Put On Your Sunday Clothes from Hello Dolly.
Beneath your parasol, the world is all a smile that makes you feel brand new down to your toes. Get out your feathers, your patent leathers, your beads and buckles and bows, for there's no blue Monday in your Sunday clothes.
Amazing. Tell us what do you think of when you hear that, and why did you pick that song?
Well, I love that you can hear Barbara's voice above everyone else's in that. That was wonderful.
She's singing out strong. I love it. Always.
Yes. Um, well, I think the reason I chose that, because you said what is it that makes you want to move and what makes you want to dance, and Arthur and I spent an enormous amount of time together in the last year, which has been great actually, at home, and preparing a meal or doing on cleaning day. The thing we love to put on is good old fashioned Broadway musicals. Um, Mainly, our favourite is Jerry Herman musicals, who did the music and lyrics to Hello Dolly, Mame, La Cage aux Folles. They're amazing. They really keep your spirits up, and we kind of want to. You, it would be hilarious if you saw us sometimes because we
I
sing,
wish I could. I
we
wish I
dance
could be a
around the
seagull
room.
on your balcony, just like looking in. I would love that. What are you? Is it just like free form? Are you just having a boogie and
Reform.
having a
Sometimes
laugh?
we'll come together for a little partnered bit, on the
Oh,
way from one room to another, and we laugh a lot,
dreamy.
and we love singing along a bit. Our dog quite enjoys it as well. He's a bit freaked.
Gets
And
involved.
sometimes he'll join the group. He'll join us in a dance. It's all a bit mad, to be honest, but it's fun. And I used to have and my previous dog, Mr. Eddie, used to love the song 76 Trombones. And he used to like to march. And I used to march around the house with him following me. And that was fun. But Ferdinand isn't so into that. He just stares at us as though we're mad, I think.
He needs to work on his marching. Yeah, noted.
But I've never lost that love of those sort of shows, really. That's my go-to happy music, yeah.
And that's it, isn't it? It brings you joy for people listening. I can see Matthew, and he's just beaming, and I am too, because it is that infectious. It just sort of makes you want to just be happy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pure joy. And I think sometimes there's a lot of intellectualism that goes on about certain things, even in musical theatre, to be honest. And you gotta love a bit of both, but those are the real Broadway musicals, I think, and that's why you get into it in the first place, and that's why I love it.
Mm. And I think that music's so connected to our memory center and our nostalgia. Can you remember where or when you first heard that song?
Well, I not exactly, but I do remember going to the cinema to see the film of Hello Dolly when it came out, and I went to the Granada Walthamstow, which is a lovely old cinema, which hopefully they're refurbishing at the moment. Real old school cinema, and for some reason they used to have continuous performances then, and you didn't pay to see one show. You just would go in, and it would be at any point during the film, sometimes weirdly. And I remember going in just as the Hello Dolly number was starting and seeing that gold dress Barbara in, and just being transported, And I sat and watched the film 2.5 times. That one first time was so good. um, so I remember, I would have probably come home and tried to be Barbara, I'm afraid,
Oh
and
no, don't be afraid. That's brilliant.
I'd want my parents to buy me the soundtrack, so I could sing along, and yeah, yeah, amazing,
Gorgeous.
and I've never
Okay.
lost that. I love those things still, obviously.
Gorgeous. Music is so vital in your creative process. Do you have any musical training? Because when I've seen you work, I do think you have that musical brain and that musical sensibility and understanding of sort of time signatures and rhythm and phrasing, and where does that come from?
It's sort of I don't have any training at all. It's self-taught again, a bit. It's a I feel it, and I also have apparently I have good pitch. I can pitch a note as well. Um, it maybe just a sort of a natural thing, but I had a conversation with our first conductor for Nutcracker, David Lloyd Jones, who's a real Tchaikovsky expert. We were lucky enough to have him for our Edinburgh Festival performances when we first did the show with Opera North, and I'd worked out all the score as I hear it. I do my little grid system with counts, And I remember him coming into the room and saying, and me being quite embarrassed because I was counting for the dancers, and I thought, well, this probably I'm doing it all wrong, you know. And I said to him, "Oh, so I'm really sorry. I'm not a musician. This is the way I hear it, you know." And he said, "Absolutely right." He said, "This is absolutely the way you should do it. You're hearing it the way an audience hears it, and you're going with the emotional line of it, or the melody line sometimes, or the." He said, "You don't want to appreciate this music in choreography as a musician. You want to hear it like the audience is hearing it." And he said, "Absolutely right. Go ahead." You know, and so it gave me such confidence that what I was doing was okay, that I've never worried about it since, really. And I don't worry that I'm doing the wrong time signature sometimes, or whatever it may be. I don't know the names of all the instruments, and I really have very little knowledge, to be honest. It's just the feeling of it, and the way my plots come about for some of the more famous scores that we've worked with are through listening to that music again and again and again, to the point where I can get rid of the images in my head that I maybe know of it already, and try and imagine a story through the music. So you do get to know it really well, but more from an emotional storytelling stance than from a technical one.
That's what I loved about hearing you talk about your version of Cinderella, because the Prokofiev was written in you know, the score was written in wartime, so you do a lot of research around when the music was created, and that obviously feeds in. But also you could hear a sort of sense of foreboding in some of that music that I think you said it really inspired you to set it within that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a light bulb moment, you know, when I listened to that score with 1940s ideas in my head. It kind of like felt, yeah, absolutely, it works, you know, and that was the trigger for that piece.
So we are coming, sadly, to the end of our podcast, but there is a couple of more questions that we want to ask our guests. This is slightly strange to ask you this because it's about you, but we're asking our guests if they could turn any story, film or book into a Matthew Bourne production, what would they pick? But you are Matthew Bourne, so I'm just kind of wondering whether, are there any other stories left that you've just got, I'm sure there are many, but that you've got a burning desire to turn into a dance show?
Not many, actually. It gets harder to find them, you know, and I'm sure there are lots of good ones, but I rack my brains like crazy, you know. But I think the one I have not really touched on is Coppelia, and I have got a little idea for that. They're sort of horror movies, and a wax set in a waxworks or something like that. Something a bit creepy. I don't think we've ever done a truly sort of slightly eerie, creepy, scary piece. That might be fun. Not, you know, not horrible, but you know, a Christmas creepy story. You know, I think that would be rather good. Yeah.
I love that. That's a great idea. You heard it here first, folks. If that comes around in the next few years, yes.
It's not planned yet, folks. Don't ask me about it. No, it's just an idea at the
moment. And to finish with, Matthew, we are ending our podcast with a bit of a silly quiz. It consists of 10 quick-fire questions that are about dance. So there's no pressure. Just answer whatever comes into your head at the time. Are you ready?
Yes, I think.
Okay, let's begin the Born to Dance quiz. Question number 1. Whilst Matthew Bourne has run a dance company since 1987, the name New Adventures wasn't the original name. What was it called before? Please get this right.
Adventures in Motion Pictures.
Correct. Thank you. Well done. Question number 2. Grande and Chico are two versions of what type of Spanish activity?
Flamenco? No?
Yes,
Oh.
absolutely right. Well done, yes. Question number 3. The patron saint of dancers and actors is who?
Oh, goodness. It's, oh. No, it's gone.
Oh,
No.
sadly not. It is Saint Vitus.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Didn't know that
No,
one.
no, I
There we
didn't
go.
know that.
Learned something
I
new
was going
again.
to say Tony, but that's not a saint.
Sadly. I wish it was. Question number 4. In 1962, Little Eva introduced what new dance?
The twist?
Oh, sadly not. It was the locomotion,
Oh, yeah.
made famous by Miss Minogue.
Yes, yeah.
Question number 5. Matthew Bourne, you have created productions to the ballet scores of great Russian composers Tchaikovsky and Prokofiev. But which of the two composed more ballets in their lifetime?
I don't really know for definite, but I think it's Prokofiev.
Correct, yes. Prokofiev composed 8, whilst Tchaikovsky only did 3.
Yeah.
Question number 6, staying with the Russian theme, the Bolshoi Ballet at the Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow is one of the world's most famous ballet companies. But what does the word Bolshoi mean?
Big or grand?
Oh, absolutely right. Well done, yes. Question number 7, what are Hamilton House and Petronella?
Hamilton House and Petronella.
It's ringing a bell, isn't it?
I don't know. Dance schools? I don't know. Not ringing a bell.
Sadly not. It's not ringing the correct bell either. They are Scottish country dances. Yeah, Scottish country dances. Question number 8. What was the name of the beguiling gypsy dancer in The Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Esmeralda?
Absolutely correct. Question number 9. Which 20th century ballerina was later edible?
Pavlova.
Absolutely right. How delicious. And finally, question number 10. According to folklore, which hypnotic dance can cure a spider's bite?
Oh. Belly dance.
That I want to see. Sadly, it was the tarantella. But the next time someone gets bitten by a spider, I'm just going to start doing a belly dance in front of them and see if that helps. Matthew Bourne, you got 6 out of 10 correct. Not bad at all.
What a relief.
It's a very valiant effort there.
Yeah, that's very difficult, Paul. Some of those questions.
Well, we're gonna see how everyone else gets on, and we're gonna do a bit of a leaderboard, and it's just a bit of silly fun. So Matthew Bourne, it has been such a pleasure to chat with you about your love of dance. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I hope you've had a good time.
Thank you, Paul. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.